So is neoliberalism in the rear view? Grace, we have where if people understood neoliberalism by Bill Clinton's "the era of big government is over" or Ronald
Mm.
Reagan's "small government," they might be surprised at what we're seeing now. Should they be?
Yeah, no, is basically the answer. And look, whether or not you think neoliberalism is dead, I think really depends on how you view it, what you think it is, basically. So if you take neoliberals at their word when they say that neoliberalism was an ideology that was all about shrinking the size of the state, creating space for free markets, expanding human freedom, all of these things that sound on the surface like quite nice things, then, yes, obviously that moment is over. There are, governments aren't even pretending anymore to kind of attempt to impose these principles. Instead, we see bailouts of massive corporations happening very frequently. We see in the US this very obvious cooperation between public and private actors in the form of Musk and Trump. But this isn't new, but the kind of naked showing off that we're seeing at the moment about the kind of public private links and the kind of almost corruption that we're really seeing across many democracies is new. So if you were to take them at their word when they said we like free markets, we want small states, then yeah, you'd be thinking, right, okay, neoliberalism is over. But in my most recent book, Vulture Capitalism, I actually show that that reading of neoliberalism isn't quite right. It's what they said they wanted, but if you read a little bit more closely, you actually see that neoliberalism always ended up producing the kinds of forms of capitalism that we're seeing today. That is kinds of capitalism in which you don't see free markets. You see huge monopolies with control over vast swathes of the world economy, which aren't really subject to the forces of competition that you would expect in a free market society. You see governments intervening frequently and regularly to promote the interests of those corporations at home and abroad. You see them intervening very forcefully when it comes to crushing workers, when it comes to crushing social movements, and then behaving very permissively and very supportively when it comes to vested interests. Well, I would say we just need to think about it as good old fashioned capitalism. And the way to understand capitalism, this is what Vulture Capitalism, my most recent book, is all about. It basically says people think that capitalism means free markets and democracy. And so we have this idea of capitalism, nice, free markets, democratic, counterposed with state socialism, which means the state controls everything and there are no markets, right? But that is a very kind of old and one-sided way of looking at things, really. Because actually existing capitalism everywhere it's ever existed has always had huge monopolistic corporations that are able to plan in the same way as you would see in a kind of centrally planned economy. Those monopolies have vast amounts of power. They don't have to listen to the market. They get to do what they want. And these societies have always relied on this close relationship between states and markets that we still see today. Um, and, that goes all the way back to the formation of capitalism with industrialization in the UK, for example, with the East India Company, which was a private company that was used by the British state to control India, basically, as a colony. And that was a joint venture between merchants and politicians. You see this pattern throughout the entire history of capitalism. And indeed, if you go back to read Marx, for example, he said the capitalist state is nothing but a committee for managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie. Now, that is a bit far because obviously workers have won certain rights and had wins within the state. But the idea that the left should become this movement that's defending a big and powerful capitalist state would have been absurd to early socialists. So this kind of idea we have of like big state versus small state is capitalism versus socialism is just plain wrong. What we need to see capitalism as is a class system. Now, I don't mean, middle class, working class, all these different, ways we have of understanding social mobility today. I mean, a very old understanding of class, which is some people own everything, that we need to produce things. Everyone else has to sell their labor power in order to survive. Now, capitalism is a system in which the people who own all the stuff we need to produce things get to make most of the decisions. They own all the wealth. They get to decide how that wealth is used. They largely get to decide what goes on within politics and within the state, whereas workers just have to kind of follow and do as they're told. Because during the post-war period, in the US, you had the New Deal, you had strong labor unions, workers had come together and basically made loads of demands within the state, outside the state, of businesses, of politicians, that had kind of weakened capital relative to workers. So neoliberalism wasn't about free markets, it wasn't about any of the stuff we're told it's about. It's about basically those at the top taking power back, taking back control over society. And they did that with attacks on the labour movement by stripping away the parts of the state that supported workers and then expanding the parts of the state that supported capital. Now, it seems to me that when you look at Elon Musk and Henry Ford, these are people separated by about 100 years. They have a lot in common. They're both basically the owners of extremely large and powerful corporations that aren't subject to competition in the same ways that we would think of in a free market society. Much of their wealth comes from cooperation with governments, yet they both preach about free markets. They are both ardently anti-worker. They hate unions. They're famous for their union-busting activities. And they're both fans of the far right. Why? Because far-right politics helps to distract workers from the fact that they're being exploited by capital and instead redirect them to hating immigrants instead. So when you look at it in that sense, it's like, has a lot changed? Or actually, are we just kind of back at normal functioning capitalism?